Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast on Mute Now, Season 5, Episode 5. We've been doing well, and we're glad that you've been keeping us company. If you're new, you're very welcome. Again, I have to remind you that we are missing Raquel, and we're missing Natasha today. But with me as co-host, we've got Angela. And we've got with us today two exciting guests. First, the lone gentleman, Dr. Daniel Gboloo-Teye. He's a consultant with the Trust, NHS, as you know. And
Hi.
Dr. Dan, hi, lovingly, well, for me, lovingly Dr. Dan, but Dr. Daniel. And alongside Dr. Dan today, we've got Roisin Hillman. Hi, Roisin.
Hi.
Roisin is the founder of the Menopause Support Group Northern Ireland, so that gives it away. We're going to be talking about mental health and menopause today. Again, back to where we started in terms of the context. If you remember, in October 2022, we had our Leveling Up Symposium where we provided the community with a lot of information on various topics, including mental health. If you haven't watched our presentations on our various channels, please do so because Dr. Dan delivered a very informative presentation on mental health as it relates to the BEAM community. I know some people hate that term BEAM, but ethnic minority community and mental health in that context. So we've got Dr. Dan today, and I say this reservedly in the wake of Nicola Bulley's death, with utmost sensitivity to her family and to all those who would have been impacted. We're going to be looking at menopause and its context or its relation to mental health. So bear with us. And please, please, please share your comments. So without any further ado, let's go straight into it. Mouthful. Roisin, please tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Okay. So my name is Roisin Hillman and I'm the founder of Menopause Support Group Northern Ireland. I suppose I set the group up after I had a hysterectomy. So I had a hysterectomy in the May of 2021 and was lying on my settee, as you do when you're recovering from major surgery, scrolling through social media and had found on a post that Davina McCall had put on that she was asking for people to fill in a survey. So I thought, I'm going to fill this survey in, because it was about menopause and, everything surrounding that. So I started to do the survey, but it was only for people in mainland England. And I put a comment underneath it, well, what about the women from Northern Ireland? What about us? And another woman commented underneath it saying, I'm from Northern Ireland too. Why can't we fill it in? So me and this lady started commenting, and then we ended up talking privately.
Wow.
So this was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'd said, tell her, I can't find anything. There's no support groups. I was already a member of a hysterectomy support group, a Facebook group, but there was nothing, that I could find in Northern Ireland. And I had asked her if she would help me if I set up a Facebook group. And she was like, no, no, I couldn't. I don't know how to do anything like that. So no, I couldn't. So as went to bed and had thought about, could I do it myself? But then you always have the self-doubt and you always have, what are people going to think about me? They're going to be going, who does she think she is? What does she know about it? But they do, and you have that in your, as you know, doctor, that you can have all them, the self-doubt and that you're not able to do things. And then another lady had put a beautiful quote on Facebook that I had seen the next morning, and it was about not dying with your music still in you. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have this, and I want to share that.
Yeah.
So that day I started a Facebook group.
And you're how many women strong today?
So at the minute we just have over 5,500 women.
2021 you started.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
And I have joined the group. And here's where the conversation gets a bit awkward. I have been saying this. Perhaps if you watched an episode that we had way back in season 3, where we talked about aging gracefully, and one of the things that I threw into that discussion was looking forward to menopause. But lo and behold, in hindsight, that probably was a very insensitive statement, because having been a member of this group for a very short time and having looked at some of the comments and some of the struggles and some of the impact, so to speak, when you're in that stage of menopause, or what's the correct term? Perimenopause, then to me it is almost like scary.
I think what it is and what I've learned from my start at the group was it's the fear of the unknown, because there is no awareness raising out there about menopause. Our GPs aren't trained in
Dr.
menopause.
Dan, the trust.
They don't do the training. So when a woman goes to the doctor with her symptoms, and this happened to me personally, I was told to write through it.
So do what?
Just write through
Just
it.
write it.
Just write through it. No big deal. And I had like different. Had itchy skin. That was the reason that I went. And he was very blasé about it.
And talking about symptoms, Roisin, I don't really want to throw you in the deep here, but I've seen some things and I'm thinking unbelievable. Like, I've seen the fact that you can lose your teeth. I've seen things where people are saying that they have sleepless nights, and I'm thinking, oh my God, come on now.
This is usually the start of it, and it is a woman will probably wake up in the middle of the night. And it is the lack of sleep, and then she maybe we would having night sweats, and that's usually the start of her and she doesn't really realise it's usually the people around her who can see the change. There's just something different. Maybe she's a wee bit more snappier, there's just the different things that happen, and it's usually your loved ones who would see that first, because you're struggling and you're working, you're looking after children, you're maybe looking after older relatives, so you
don't actually notice necessarily what's happening to you very quickly. At what stage, roughly, and I know it varies for different women, but when we're talking about perimenopause, that sort of getting into it, right? What's the earliest sort of stage that you're aware of?
Oh, right. Well, so there's some women who can go into perimenopause. It's called, can't remember, the POI. So it's an earlier stage. So that would be where the doctors would have to really look after you with that. But for women who don't have any issues, just normal women, just like ourselves, it's usually around the age of 45 is whenever you become perimenopausal. And if you go to your GP with those symptoms of perimenopause, and you're 45 and you go with, I'm not sleeping, I've sore joints, I've itchy skin, maybe have dry vagina, there's a whole myriad of symptoms. But if you go to your doctor with these, then if your doctor is trained to recognise it, they will be able to say to you, it looks like you're maybe a perimenopause, instead of sending you for 20 million.
Right. Well, at least I'll be asking them, am I perimenopausal? Because I've learned a few things. Before we get to Dr. Dan, you talked very quickly.
I think, let me come in briefly.
Yes, Dr. Dan, thank you.
Certainly, I don't think any man can adequately share our understanding of menopause because of our sex.
Yeah.
Or of our gender. And therefore, I wouldn't pretend that I have any in-depth experience, and my training even as a psychiatrist does not delve into the details of any of these subjects. So much more. I'm not surprised that primary care GP average physicians seems not to have that adequate knowledge. But I think some of the things you've shared, and not, I hope, my own wife who started going into those perimenopausal symptoms, I think looking back, I would say were some of the most horrendous experiences that you could be confronted with. And my heart goes out to her, and especially the lack of sleep was a profound and very significant issue. And therefore, if you're somebody like her who really enjoyed prolonged sleep and now you can't sleep, I don't know how you cope with that. So just a thought on my own personal experience.
And thank you for chipping that in, because I think what we also need to think about, of course, is the experience of women themselves, but also the experience of the families and those closest to them, and what that does to the dynamics of the relationship.
And that's the important thing, that with the group, you know, yes, the group is a closed group and it is only for women.
No men.
They can't be, because it has to be a really, really safe, it has to be a safe space where women can share everything and know that there's not going to be, that they're not going to be judged or feel that they can't, you know, because I know for me personally, when women come together, and this is one of my wee taglines, when women come together, amazing things happen, you know, we all support, empower and encourage each other. But I am a great believer that men have to come to the table too, and men have to be educated in this and have an understanding that whenever their wives aren't the way they were, that it's not because they don't love them anymore, it's not because they don't want to have sex with them anymore. Their body, the woman's body, is just totally changing, and they just need a wee bit of time.
Absolutely.
You know, so, but some men don't, who maybe aren't educated in it, which the women aren't educated in it, so how can the men be? You know, just don't have that understanding. So it's important that there is more awareness raising.
Yeah, I am paying my GP a visit. I think I'm there listening to you. Some of the symptoms. Anyway, you mentioned something very a couple minutes ago about the whole idea. Well, not the idea. The condition, or being snappy, for want of a better word. And I really just want to zero in on that a little bit in terms of the impact of menopause on the person's mental health, because we mentioned Nicola Bully briefly, and so mental health in itself and the impact from your experience, what have you seen? And then Dr. Dan will then be talking to you generically about mental health within the context of your work. But Machine, any thoughts?
I suppose a lot of women, whenever they go to the doctor first, you know, without even thinking it's perimenopause, and they'll go to the doctor and they'll say, my mood's low, that's a sign of perimenopause. I'm not sleeping at night, you know, I'm feeling really anxious, you know, don't know what it is, I'm really, really anxious, and I just can't tell you why I'm feeling like this. Everything's okay in my life, but I've all these issues. And instead of the doctor asking the woman, is there anything else going on? You know, any other symptoms? They'll focus in on them and they're prescribing antidepressants. And if you go to the NICE guidelines, you will see that antidepressants should not be prescribed for perimenopausal symptoms. You know, you need to get, excuse me, you need to be getting HRT if you're able to take HRT, or your doctor needs to be talking to you about different things that you can do to promote like good health.
Okay, right. Okay, well, Dr. Dan, going back to the symposium, as I said earlier, you would have done a very informative presentation on mental health and, you know, the context of the BME community within that. So if you can just shed a bit of light for us today on some of the barriers overall that you would see in terms of access to services when it comes to the BME community, that would kind of anchor the conversation in a different way.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Yolande. Even before I come to the barriers, I think in my discussion at the education session of the symposium, I think I tried to kind of understand or present an understanding of mental health difficulties of the ethnic minorities with an analogy of the greenhouse.
Yes.
Okay. And if you take the greenhouse is normally used to grow crops or cultivate crops that are not in their natural environment.
Yeah.
And for those crops to thrive, you need, you know, a well-controlled environment with well-managed resources, which are managed at the microscopic details. Okay. Therefore, my understanding of the health issues or mental health issues, not just health, mental health, can be likened to the greenhouse effect. That people who have moved away from their own environment, living in a different culture, you know, need the most support in a well-managed, controlled stage or phase to be able to thrive. Okay, and that is kind of my understanding. So that on its own gives you an impression of some of the things that, you know, the minority groups struggle with on day-to-day basis. Because if you take a greenhouse which is being cultivated, the owners are managing these things at a very kind of detailed level.
Yeah.
But you just thrown in here with the lack of adequate support, and no wonder you can see the myriads or the multiple, health, general health as well as mental health concerns that come with the BMA group.
Yeah.
So in terms of the barriers, I look at the barriers in kind of two broad perspectives. There are barriers that I'll call are inherent within the BMA group themselves, or the people who are suffering from all of this, and then the barriers that are outside of them. Okay. So within the group itself, the people who have immigrated or migrated into this environment, one, we come with a lot of, cultural, difficult or cultural prejudices.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of those cultural difficulties themselves present as a barrier. For example, in most minority groupings, mental health or mental illness is a taboo subject.
Yeah, in itself. Yeah.
You don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
It's like, the simple word is it's a taboo subject.
Yeah.
So people go through, the early onset of mental difficulties with just suffer in silence.
Yeah.
You don't want your friends to know. You don't want your neighbors to know. You don't want anybody to know. So by the time that it is presenting, it would have gone on so far and become a very severe presentation. So that, I think, is one of the biggest barriers that we present with. So that is a barrier. Then the other barrier is the lack of understanding of the health services or pathway to getting help within the culture. That is also a significant barrier. Okay, so you don't even know what resources are there, you don't know what services are there, and therefore, if you don't know what is there, how do you go on looking for help? Okay, even if you get to know, oftentimes language is a major barrier as well. And the language, and I always have this funny bit of me trying to get used to the Northern Ireland accent, as they call it. It took me years being here to be able to appreciate or to understand. And it works both ways.
Both ways, yeah. Absolutely.
It works both ways.
Absolutely.
So language is also a major, barrier in that context. So those are some of the inherent...
And just not to cut you off, when you talk about accent, even though we acknowledge that there's work that's being done, for example, interpreters within the trust, interpreters can't really interpret accent. So that barrier is still there. And we do acknowledge as well that there are quite a lot of support services out there trying to direct newcomers to the right resources. So we do acknowledge that. And so we know that there's work being done, but we are still looking at the barriers that exist.
So that is very true. Yes. Okay. So then we move on to the barriers. So barriers within the people themselves, and then now the barriers external to the people. And I talk about the lack of knowledge of the services, and then, similarly, the language barriers, and it works both ways. So, so those will be barriers within a people. Then when you take outside of the people, similarly, the services are usually designed to meet, the people who work within the service. Their understanding of the service is tailored to meet the needs of the local population.
Majority.
So trying to understand, your need in the context of that becomes also, a barrier. Then there's also a huge issue of stigma to the ethnic minorities in terms of presentation of mental health, issues. Not just stigma against minorities, but mental health even within the standard population. There is a huge issue of stigma, relating to it, and stigma, is hugely important. Now, that aspect of stigma, one trying to, let me put it this way. the average individual who is a minority coming into a general mental health service, struggling to understand some of these issues themselves, being confronted or going into, a health setting where people don't understand general symptoms of presentation, okay, becomes a barrier, okay. Yeah. Then there is the issue of transcultural understanding of symptoms, okay. Way back home, we say there are, depression back home can present in a different way, like somebody will start talking about main symptoms of depression will be just, having burning sensations in the head or burning sensation in the body. That's different from the menopausal bit, as you described. Okay. And therefore, when out of the cultural environment, you start going to talk about this to the person who is giving you the help, for them, this can become a physical symptom. Yeah. And therefore, that takes them off course. Okay. So interpretation of symptom can be a barrier. Understanding of the symptom by the providers can be a difficulty. And then also the services being set up, in such a way that, access to them, you have to go through many routes, many systems to be able to access all of this. Yeah. Can all become barriers. Those are a few, and if we can talk about some of them.
Thanks for sharing those. Just a quick thought. I know that there was a book that was written by a young guy who was studying, a medical student, who was studying, and he was finding that all of the examples that they were using for identifying symptoms, so to the color of the skin changing, I can't remember the name of this young man, just didn't apply to Black people because, it looked different. And so he set about writing, doing some research and so on, and putting together essentially a manual, which I believe is now in use, to identify and translate those symptoms in, people of color. I guess my thought is just looking at from the mental health perspective. I mean, what you've just said is pretty profound, which is that if depression is presenting as burning sensations in the body, very different to I've got my mood is low and so on. Is there room, is there scope, is there anything at all in the horizon for trying to translate the sort of symptoms that you're seeing from the majority population for the ethnic minority population in the mental health field?
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that question. And my thought on that is that over time, the Royal College of Psychiatrists is focusing on transcultural psychiatry more and more, and therefore the knowledge base is beginning to expand. Recently, about 3 years ago, the college, the Black and Black African psychiatrists within the UK, we have just established what we call the ABP, Association of Black Psychiatrists within the UK. And we are now working to kind of expand the knowledge base and understanding of transcultural psychiatrists and the difficulties of minorities presented with mental health concerns. So these are all things that are gradually growing. To interest you to know that even though we are a very young group, we have the first Black woman president of the College of Psychiatrists who has just been appointed, and we've been in existence for just about 3-4 years now, and that is significant. So as a cultural or as a specialty, knowledge about this is improving. We are getting support to kind of expand the knowledge base and educate ourselves and, work with the local population to help understand and expand the knowledge on some of these issues as you've asked.
Okay. Well, just to move the conversation back to you, Roisin, a little bit, the whole context of mental health being taboo and in terms of the ethnic minority community and throwing menopause on top of that is double whammy. So for me, I want to ask you, what, if any, is work that you've done with women from the ethnic minority community? Have you done any such work? If not, what are some of the barriers, potentially that you might experience in working with women from the ethnic minority community? What are your thoughts?
So suppose I do have experience of working with women from different cultures. So I worked in a women's aid refuge, and during that time you had women from every culture coming in, so you were experiencing different cultures and talking to women. I worked with the Syrian refugees, so again a totally different culture, and it wasn't, I suppose, until I had an understanding of menopause.
In terms of menopause discussion, that's interesting, because I suppose some of the barriers would be religious, backgrounds and religious context. So
women would have said, when they got to a certain age, I'm just waiting for God, and my life is over now, and I'd have been like, you're younger than me. No, we can't be talking about this. Obviously I'm not medically trained, and I would never have said to any woman, oh, you could be menopausal. But on reflection, a lot of the health issues that the ladies would have presented with probably were perimenopausal issues. So what I'm doing is, at the minute, I'm planning to do an awareness raising session with the Syrian women. And that'll be done over Zoom, because the women are all over Northern Ireland, and it means that we can have that conversation. So the presentation that I have done, the PowerPoint, is getting translated into Arabic for them. Next week, I'm going to do an event with another group of ethnic minority women, and we will need an interpreter for that as well. So I've got a friend who can do that for me. So it is getting out there. We don't have a lot of women from ethnic minorities on the group. I have never counted, but for me, it's women. It's just women coming together. I don't care where you're from, who you are, what you do. I just want all of us to be together. But it's getting out there into the different communities in Northern Ireland to say, I'm here. We're here. Come on in. Yeah. And nobody's ever you'll be welcomed. Doesn't matter where you're from.
Roisin, so I'm throwing you in the deep end here, because I know we didn't talk about your personal background in the beginning, but I'm interested now, just thinking of it. What is your cultural heritage? Sorry, guys, I had to do this. I had to do this. You can't just have that nice curly hair.
That's not fair.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I suppose I was born in 1968 in Belfast. My dad was across the road there in Queen's University, so he was here from Nigeria studying.
My sister.
So he was studying in Queen's and met my mum, and they got together and had me, and then my brother came along a few years later. So there's me and my brother, here. So that's my, and I suppose I do have, my dad did give me and my brother our Nigerian names. So
really?
Yes. So I've got my Belfast accent, so I probably won't pronounce it totally wrong, So my Nigerian name is Ngozi Anik.
Love it.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? I know.
Yeah. Well done. All right, guys. So we're coming to the end. We're just going to have just one more question I want to just throw up to both Dr. Dan and Roisin. Roisin, you can go first, because you're already on the floor. In terms of, menopause and women and the impact of menopause, what are some of the coping mechanisms that you perhaps would recommend from your experience?
So for women, to remember that you're not alone, because when a woman starts her perimenopausal journey, she really feels alone. And from the groups that we do within the group, we would go out on the road, women will come into wherever we're holding a meeting, and they'll say, I'm so glad to be here, because I really felt that I was on my own, because it's not talked about. So coming together, that's the most important thing, and knowing that you're not alone on this journey. And you have to educate yourself so much, because the reason you have to do it is because some of our health professionals aren't doing it.
getting some licks, Dr. Dan.
No, and I get it's general practitioners.
Yes,
a doctor
absolutely.
cannot be trained in absolutely everything, so we understand that. But you, as a woman, you need to take responsibility for your health. You need to read the NICE guidelines. You need to join Dr. Louise Newson's Balance Up. You need to be listening to her podcasts. There's so many things that you can do. And once you start understanding it, and knowing that this journey too will end, it's not going to keep going, and you can get the help and the support. But coming together as women and just finding your community and your supports.
I think I've shared this before on the last podcast, if I remember correctly. I have got an uncle who is younger than I am, and my grandmother calls him the miracle baby, and this is one of my greatest fear because he was born at the point where she thought she was over menopause. It was a serious shock. You can imagine what that would have done to someone's mental health at that age, at that time in your life. And that is probably my biggest fear. When I think it's done, here comes a miracle baby. No, thank you. Dr. Dan, over to you. Okay. Over to you on some of the coping.
So, Yolanda, at what age did that happen?
She was going to be, if I remember correctly, close to 60.
Wow.
Yeah. So he is younger than I am. Yeah. Miracle baby. And probably good miracle because he is a pastor today. Maybe God wanted that young man. That was one for you, Angela.
That's a nice one. Yes.
Thank you,
all right.
Dr. Dan. So just in terms of, bringing this to a close, just talk about some of the coping mechanisms in dealing with mental health difficulties in general.
No, thank you very much. Even before I come to the, coping mechanisms, there was one big barrier that I thought I need to mention, adding to those that I've talked about, and that is the social, economic, or financial barrier, which is a major issue. That immigrants or the BMA are some of the most deprived, low-income earners who are on, benefits and other things, and therefore traveling for having developed difficulties, even the means to be able to then access the help can be an issue. And therefore my thought will be, how is the system adapting to be able to support such people when they are presenting? So that's just to throw that in there. Then when it comes to the coping mechanisms, as Roisin has said, let us not suffer in silence. In terms of the taboo subjects, let us know that mental health problems is common to every population, to every human being. Black, white, Asian, you name it, okay? And therefore, when you begin to having symptoms which you cannot understand or feel, this is not the usual me, speak to somebody, seek help, speak to your GP. I think, as I said, the knowledge base is building up and people want to include everybody, so early seeking of help is so important, okay? The other coping mechanisms is friends and, family, I believe that having a network of support of people you could confide in, people you could relate to, and opening up to them will go a long way to help cushion some of those, difficulties that come with mental ill health. People developing mental ill health tend to isolate themselves and keep themselves to themselves. We want to recommend that, in terms of support, don't suffer in silence. Come out, know that you're not going to be judged, know that, the subject of mental illness, as I've said, is so common, and we all suffer some, stress times in our lives, at some point, in time. So that is one. The other thing that I want to mention as a coping mechanisms is just, let's take our minds to COVID. Okay, when COVID hit and there was a lockdown and everybody, can't go anywhere, people took to their, to going for walks,
music,
and those are really, really important.
Yep.
That the outdoor green spaces and going for walk and exercise are so important means of coping with mental ill health. And even if you have medication at all, medication alone is not the solution. These day-to-day things that all go a long way to help. Your sleeping is important. A good night's sleep, having a proper structured sleep pattern or sleep routines can be a good coping mechanisms. Hobbies and leisure times. One of the things I want to say is when people are going through mental difficulties, the tendency is to want to do nothing. Just keep yourself to yourself.
Yeah.
What we recommend in terms of behavior therapy is that is the wrong thing to do. Even though you might not feel like doing things, learn to push yourself to begin to do something. And the more you push yourself, the more these things, go, away to help boost, your energy level, your mood, and all of those things, So those are some of the, common coping mechanisms that, I want to recommend to the average day-to-day, person.
Can I just ask you, because you mentioned your wife, sorry, just a quick word of advice for somebody who has someone in their family who is going through menopause. What advice would you give as to how to support? Just very briefly, because you've obviously lived it.
I think Roisin has mentioned, that oftentimes, the person at the receiving end is going through a most difficult time, okay, but the impact on the family, the impact on if the person is married or is in a relationship, the impact on your partner or spouse is hugely important. And I think that spouses, family members should not be isolated from understanding or talking about the menopause and knowing that people are not just being difficult or just being snappy, and being able to adapt and adjust to that supportive stance to family members going through those difficulties, So it is knowing that we can suffer or endure this together and that you are not alone. I think that would be my biggest, recommendation.
Right. Okay. Time's running out on us. It's a big conversation. There's so much we could have said or talked about that we didn't. Share your thoughts with us. If you're listening, ask questions. We will probably have to redirect them to either Roisin or Dr. Dan, but please engage with us on all platforms. Any final thoughts just before we bring it to a wrap here? It's been great, guys. Season 5 so far, and we hope you stay with us. We've only got about 3-4 more episodes to go, but it's been great. Final thoughts, anybody? Roisin?
I suppose for me, it's about making sure that whenever you're starting to have your symptoms, that you educate yourself, you go to your GP and you find a group of women who can support, encourage and empower you.
Angela?
Yeah, just listen, I couldn't have said it any better, so just keep raising the volume.
Absolutely. And so we are at the end. Please, please, please remember, we've got our social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram. We've also got our website, www.UKPivot.com. And you can find us on YouTube. You know the drill. It will be coming up in the graphics at the bottom. I don't need to call it all out. So guys, it's a wrap. Keep raising the volume and the whisper conversations in our communities. And from us at On Mute Now, see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.